There is a feeling that has been accompanying you for some time now, even though you cannot always name it. It is not exactly frustration, nor is it enthusiasm. It is something more subtle. The impression of being on the verge of understanding something that has always been there, yet has not fully revealed itself. As if one part of you had already crossed a threshold, while another part is still waiting for a sign that confirms you are not imagining any of it. It is not that you are unprepared, nor is it that you are excluded from something greater. What you are experiencing is not a lack of progress, it is transition. It is not an absence of clarity, it is frequency adjusting. There are moments when you feel that your life no longer fully fits the version of who you used to be, but it doesn't completely align with the one you are building either. That in-between space is not confusion. It is coherence emerging. And if something within you recognized these words effortlessly, if you felt they describe a state you have been carrying in silence, then this is not coincidence. Being here is not random. It is resonance. The question is not why you arrived at this point, but which part of you already knew it was time to hear this. What you are listening to is not embellished mysticism or an emotional promise designed to inspire you for a few minutes. It is not about symbols you must believe in or concepts you must adopt. It is about something more structural, simpler, and at the same time deeper. The way your consciousness organizes itself and responds when it reaches a certain level of internal coherence. Many times, you interpret these moments as coincidences or as passing curiosity. But something is happening here that almost no one sees. It is not that the information appears because you searched for it long enough. It appears when your internal state becomes compatible with it. It is not the accumulation of knowledge, it is recognition. At Spiritual Awakening, we do not teach spirituality. We provoke clarity. This is not about learning something new, but about remembering what was already operating within you, waiting to organize itself. True activation is not external. It does not immediately change the world. It changes the way you perceive it, and that reorganizes everything else naturally. If you are here, it is not because you needed more theory. It is because your perception was already ready to reframe what you are living. And when perception shifts, something deeper begins to move. Imagine that knowledge does not exist as a line you walk step by step, but as a signal that is always transmitting. It is not stored in a place you must someday reach. It is available, but it only becomes audible when your internal dial adjusts to its frequency. It is not time that determines when something appears in your life. It is resonance. There are ancient texts that were not written to inform, but to activate. They were not trying to convince, they were trying to recognize. They function like a mirror that remains opaque until the one who looks into it is ready to see clearly. It is not magic. It is coherence between the internal state and what is revealed. You can surely remember moments when a book arrived exactly when you needed to understand something you did not yet know how to articulate. Conversations that seemed casual, yet answered questions you had been carrying in silence. People who appeared at the exact point when you were prepared to hear what you would not have understood before. It was not luck. It was synchrony between your consciousness and the field surrounding you. A book is not found. It recognizes. And when it recognizes, it opens. What appears to be coincidence is structure. And that structure begins to become visible when you stop searching outside for what is actually adjusting within. The law that sustains all of this is simpler than it seems, and precisely because of that, almost no one sees it. Reality does not respond to the effort you declare. It responds to the frequency you embody. It does not matter how much you say you are ready. What matters is who you are when no one is watching. The text, the teaching, the treasure you believe you are searching for is not conquered or pursued. It does not appear because you deserve it more or because you try with greater intensity. It reveals itself when your consciousness crosses an invisible threshold, when the version of you that can sustain it finally exists. The resources of existence are not locked. They are not being withheld while waiting for you to prove something. They are available, but they require coherence. And coherence is not performed, it is inhabited. This is the principle that almost everyone overlooks. They believe that the accumulation of actions opens doors. Yet what truly opens the door is the silent transformation of identity. It is not a matter of intensity, it is a matter of alignment. And when that alignment occurs, what once seemed distant begins to feel inevitable. And this is where confusion almost always arises. When something does not arrive, when an opportunity does not materialize, when a relationship does not flow, or a stage feels stagnant, the automatic reaction is usually to do more. More discipline, more strategies, more reading, more techniques, more affirmations, more internal control. You strive to think better, feel better, act better. You adjust habits, organize goals, reinforce spiritual practices. You try to become the appropriate version of yourself through accumulation, not out of arrogance, but out of commitment, because you genuinely want to move forward. But stagnation is not born from a lack of willpower. It is born from incoherence. It is not that you are doing too little. It is that what you are doing is not always aligned with who you are at a deeper level. You can affirm abundance while holding fear. You can speak of confidence while acting from urgency. You can seek expansion from an identity that still feels incomplete. The problem is not insufficient effort. It is internal misalignment. And that misalignment is not corrected by adding more actions, but by examining the frequency from which you are acting. Then an inevitable question arises, though it is rarely asked with honesty. What does it truly mean to be aligned? To understand what it means to align, sometimes explanation is not enough. There are structures that are better understood when they are contemplated through an image. The ritual of the universe is not an external ceremony. It is a living dynamic that manifests through symbols, through scenes that seem like stories, but in reality encode principles of resonance and preparation. Allow me to take you somewhere else, not to distract you, but to show you how this law operates when it is embodied. Imagine an ancient marketplace that does not exist on any map. It is not a physical space, it is a field of possibilities. In it, every object is available, but not everyone can sustain it. And here something important happens. Objects are not sold to those who desire them intensely, but to those who can recognize them without anxiety. These stories are not fantasy. They are mirrors. They reveal how reality responds when consciousness reaches a certain state. Let me show you what this looks like when it stops being theory and becomes experience. What you will observe is not a moral lesson. It is a structure in action. First, you contemplate the metaphor. Then, you recognize the pattern. And finally, you integrate the principle. Because what appears external always ends up pointing inward. In the parable of the blacksmith, there is something that is not usually noticed at first glance. He does not fail because of a lack of skill. He does not lack tools. What blocks him is the identity from which he attempts to shape the metal. He believes that control is power. He believes that forcing is progress. And the more he tries to impose his will, the more resistance he encounters. Here is the truth that changes the game. The force that is born from the fear of not being enough always generates opposition. Not because the world is against you, but because the frequency from which you act is not coherent with what you are trying to create. Almost no one names this clearly. It is not the environment. It is not destiny. It is not a scarcity of opportunities. It is the identity that sustains the action. The perpetual seeker who never rests. The one who fights to prove their worth. The one who feels late, who believes they have lost time, who thinks they must recover something. All of those identities operate from a frequency of lack, and lack does not attract expansion. It sustains repetition. Stagnation is not the absence of movement. It is movement from an unconscious identity. Opportunity is not missing. What is missing is alignment between who you are and what you are trying to receive. Now, what changes is not adding something new to your list of practices. It is activating a disposition that already exists within you. This is not one more exercise. It is a way of adjusting your perception. There are 3 simple movements that reveal whether you are ready to embody another frequency. The first is remembering, not in a nostalgic way, but consciously. Think of moments in your life when something arrived exactly when it could be sustained. A conversation, a breakup, a book, an opportunity. They did not arrive earlier. They did not arrive late. They arrived when your consciousness was able to integrate them. This recognition changes the way you receive the present. The second movement is physical. Openness is not only mental. Sit with your back upright, hands open on your legs, not as a symbol, but as physical coherence with your internal disposition. Breathe without forcing. Notice how the body feels when it stops anticipating and simply is. Something subtle happens here. Control begins to loosen. And the third is a simple but honest declaration. I am ready. Not as an optimistic affirmation, but as permission. And as you say it internally, observe which part of you resists. There is no mistake there. There is identity letting go. The practice does not improve your worth. It allows you to inhabit it. When something organizes itself within you, it naturally seeks to express itself, not as exhibition, but as coherence. That is why this moment is not only individual. The frequency you choose to sustain also influences the field you share with others. If this clarity is resonating, subscribing or marking that you are here is not a gesture of external support. It is a conscious anchoring. It is declaring that you choose to remain in this disposition of recognition. It is not about following someone. It is about following your own coherence. And if you want to deepen that anchoring, leave a simple phrase in the comments. I am ready to receive what is seeking me. Not as a formula, but as an internal act made visible. Or even a single word that represents the energy you are choosing to inhabit now. Open, aligned, present, available. Your declaration is not small. It may be the recognition another person needed to read in order to remember the same. When internal intention is expressed, it amplifies, not by quantity, but by resonance. And that collective resonance sustains what you individually began to recognize. Now observe how this manifests in the everyday. The marketplace is not a distant place. It is every interaction you have. The forge is not on a remote mountain. It is every decision you make. The book does not wait in a hidden library. It is written in the way you interpret what happens to you. Think of a relationship you tried to hold on to out of fear of losing it. The tighter you held, the more it moved away. Not because the bond was impossible, but because the frequency from which you were acting generated tension. Now remember a conversation that emerged effortlessly at the right moment when you stopped trying to convince and simply were honest. The difference was not in the words, but in the internal state. Notice where you are pushing in your life. In a project that does not quite take off. In a goal that seems delayed. in the constant need to prove that you are progressing. Sometimes, when the pressure decreases and identity softens, the opportunities that seemed blocked begin to reveal themselves clearly. Not because they appear out of nowhere, but because your perception shifts. Trusting timing is not passivity, it is coherence. And coherence redefines how you choose, how you respond, and how you receive. What once seemed like an obstacle begins to be seen as adjustment, and what seemed like delay as silent preparation. If you look closely, the marketplace, the forge, and the book are not different places. They are expressions of the same principle. The marketplace represents possibilities that are always available. The forge reveals the relationship between identity and creation. The book symbolizes the living text that activates when you are ready to read yourself with honesty. None of that was outside. It was all happening within you. The traveler who finally recognizes the object that belongs to him is the part of you that stops seeking approval and begins to recognize coherence. The blacksmith who abandons force and discovers flow is the part of you that understands that control is not power. Even the descent into darkness, those moments when you doubted everything, were necessary chapters to adjust your frequency. Each experience was a page, each loss a sentence, each waiting period a paragraph preparing the next. There was no delay. There was maturation. There was no blockage. There was identity readjusting itself. When you understand this, something begins to move. Because recognizing that you were always ready implies something deeper. The version of you that lived from lack begins to lose its foundation. And when an identity can no longer sustain itself, inevitably something new takes its place. So the question is not whether you are ready. The question is whether you are going to choose to live as someone who already is. Will you sustain this frequency when you return to the everyday? Will you release the identity that defined itself through lack, through urgency, through the feeling of being late? The universe doesn't respond like an external entity deciding to reward or deny you something. It responds like a mirror. It reflects the consciousness you embody. When you change your frequency, the way the world organizes itself in front of you changes, not by magic, but by coherence. There is no ending here. There is a threshold. And every threshold implies a decision, not a dramatic decision, but an internal one. Silent, sustained. Because when you truly inhabit this disposition, something begins to transform. The old structure, the version of you that was sustained by fear or constant searching, begins to lose consistency, not as punishment, as a natural consequence. And that opens a new stage, one that is not about seeking more, but about sustaining what you have already recognized. The question is simple, but profound. Will you cross